All right, we got Dan Wolken with USA Today. He's a college football sports writer. Dan, welcome in with Wimp and I inside the locker room.
It's a pleasure. How are you?
Oh, we're doing good, Dan. We want to get your take. I saw you had some tweets out about, and I kind of agree with you, to be honest with you, about Alabama and about what the committee did. Kind of give us your take on what the committee did with the Final Four and even the top 16 and where they put Alabama.
Well, I don't have a ton of complaints about how they rank the teams generally. I just think Alabama gets evaluated on a different scale than everybody else. I mean, look, Alabama's a really good team, and they may well win the SEC West and win the SEC and play their way into the playoff like they did last year. And I have absolutely no problem with that. If that's the way it plays out, then they will deserve to be there. But for now, I think the committee's job, in my mind, is to evaluate what teams have done to this point in time. And Alabama is the only team in the country to me that basically gets forgiven for having a loss. And I don't understand that. And it wasn't a great loss. It was a home loss. They turned the ball over 5 times. They gave up 400-something yards of offense, and they did it to a team that has subsequently got blasted by Florida and lost by 2 touchdowns to Memphis. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, no, that's good. I think you're right. Here's what they try to say to, and I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just trying to tell you what the committee tries to say. They're saying that they don't base what they do on a one game. On any one game deal is pretty much out. I thought, that Baylor would be in the top 4. They weren't, but the committee's answer, I think, and I want you to continue to go on what you're saying, is that they don't look at it as they don't look at the one game scenario.
Well, I think it's very hard at this point to evaluate teams like Baylor and TCU because they have backloaded schedules and that they haven't played high-quality opponents yet.
Yeah.
So it's hard, I think, and it's part of the problem with the committee putting out these rankings, and it puts people like Jeff Long in a position where they've got to then go out and justify and answer questions because they're trying to, be transparent. And I appreciate that, but it puts them in a position to, frankly, have to say some pretty stupid things. They're sitting there talking about, well, why is Iowa ranked here and Baylor ranked there, and they're having a time. Well, Iowa's offense isn't as explosive. I mean, really, like that. That's not what this is supposed to be about. About evaluating how explosive Iowa's offense is. They're just making it up as they go along. The reality is, why are they ranking the teams this way? Because that's who they think is better. And then they're working backwards to try to justify it, making up stuff like, well, look at how many teams over 500 they beat. That's what they use for putting Ohio State at number 3. So 2 of the teams that are over 500 that Ohio State has beaten this year are Northern Illinois and some other MAC school like Western Michigan or something like that. I don't even know. So that's all silliness. That's not a metric that they're supposed to use. It's just making it up as they go along. And I think one of the things that's happening in the committee room that I think is very noticeable now at this point is the guys like Barry Alvarez and Tom Osborne, the old former coaches have a lot of influence in that committee room. They have a heavy hand. And I think it's only natural for those guys to look at it and give an undue amount of respect to the old guard brand names. Again, this is all going to play itself out at the end, and I'm fine with it. And you're going to have 5 power conference champions, and 4 of them are probably going to make it. Notre Dame could supplant somebody, one of those 5. We'll just have to see. But I just think when we are releasing these rankings right now, and you're putting, I have a problem with Ohio State at 3. I just don't think they've earned it to this point. They haven't done anything. You put Alabama at number 4 with a loss over undefeated teams. I just disagree with it. I don't like the rationale.
Well, I think we're talking to Dan Wolken with USA Today, college football writer. I personally think, I want to get your take on it, it's the Nick Saban factor. You know, when Nick Saban doesn't like a certain rule, he goes out and he talks about it, and a lot of times something will change. I think those guys sitting in that committee room have so much respect for him, and I think his team normally gets the benefit of the doubt in any scenario. It's because maybe they're afraid of what he may come out and say. Do you see any validity to that?
Well, I would agree with the first part, that Alabama gets the benefit of the doubt because of what they did between 2009 and 2012. There's no question in my mind. Now, look, as far as what I see when I watch this Alabama team, I do not see as good of a team as what Alabama was in that period of time. I think there's much more parity across the board. I think that Alabama, while very talented, has some holes that those teams didn't have. But I do think that they get the benefit of the brand name and the fact that people just believe, and based on recruiting rankings and whatever else, that Nick Saban and Alabama are automatically one of the top 4 teams in the country, and that's why they've been favored in how many consecutive games. But this is college football, and being favored doesn't really mean anything. Alabama was favored by 8 points over Ohio State last year, and they got crushed. So you have to. To me, this is the process is still
crushed might be a little bit of an overstatement. I don't know that they got crushed.
They were overwhelmed in the second half of that game. However you want to say it, they were beaten soundly. The game was not in doubt for much of the fourth quarter. But either way, all I'm saying is, at some point the results have to matter. I mean, I thought that's what this process with the committee was supposed to be about, that the results were going to matter. And I just think that, when you talk about Alabama, well, they turned it over 5 times, so we'll give them a pass. I don't agree with that. That's part of the game. Or even Notre Dame. Well, they played in a rainstorm. Well, it wasn't raining on Clemson. They got beat.
Well, let me ask you this: if Alabama wins out and Ole Miss wins out, and let's say Ole Miss wins the SEC championship, and that's not that far fetched. I mean, it could happen. We have people saying that Ole Miss will lose one, but let's say that does happen. What will everybody across the country say if Alabama's in the Final Four, but Ole Miss is not? But Alabama could not even make it. Would Alabama make it in that scenario?
No.
See, that says no.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no way they could make it.
It's an interesting question, and it presents a really tough dilemma for the committee. I mean, basically, at that point, what you would do as the committee is you would basically be going back on what you said last year, which is the conference championships matter. And so to put in Alabama ahead of Ole Miss, I mean, they wouldn't both get in under that scenario. There's no way they would both get in. So you'd be jumping Ole Miss ahead of the team that won the conference championship and beat them head-to-head. I mean, that's a nightmare.
Yeah,
That's
but I'm saying in that
scenario.
situation, Alabama will be probably, if they win this weekend, they're going to probably be sitting there at number 2 if that happened. You're not going to jump, but you're not going to jump Alabama from 2 to 5 out of the poll because they didn't make it to Atlanta. I don't know how you could.
Yeah,
do
you
that.
are. Yeah, you are.
No, you're not. There's no way.
I mean, but what is this again? What is the system supposed to be? I mean, are they saying if they're the ones saying that conference championships matter? Well, then I don't know. I mean, the whole thing about if you played Ole Miss again on a neutral field, who would win and who would you pick and all that stuff. Of course, I would pick Alabama, but that's not what the system is supposed to be about, is it? I mean, if that's what it's going to be, then why even play the season? Let's just get some Vegas odds makers in the room and say who are the 4 best teams. Let's just play them all. It presents a great conundrum. I mean, I don't know that it's going to turn out that way, but if it does, it's gonna there's going to be a lot of people upset on either side of which way that goes.
Let me ask you this: if would it be better to keep the head of the committee and substitute the committee each year, change committee members each year?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't necessarily think it's the people on the committee that are the problem. I mean, it's whether it's a committee or people voting in a poll or replacing people out or whatever. It's always going to be a subjective process. Unless you just go to some sort of straight computer formula, or I mean, the real solution, honestly. And I've been against an 18 playoff because I think four preserves the regular season. But if you're talking about what creates the least amount of consternation about stuff like this, the answer is obviously you go to 8 and you put automatic bids in for the 5 power conference champions, and then you have 3 spots that are open as wild cards that would allow for an Alabama if they end up not winning the division and finish with 1 loss, or Notre Dame or Memphis this year if they go undefeated, or whomever. That's the answer, but I don't think we're going to get there, and in some ways I still do like 4 better.
Well, Dan, do you see any scenario? I don't think there's any way Memphis can get up there, but I hope Memphis runs the table or one of those guys. I think that might push towards getting 8 teams in, where you can reward a Memphis or a Houston or a Temple that probably would never get in the Final Four to get them actually in the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, it would be – I don't know if they can get in the playoff. Probably not. I think there would have to be a lot more chaos. I think, the recipe for Memphis to get in the playoff would be Ole Miss winning the division, and then, Stanford beats Notre Dame, and then, and then maybe Utah beats Stanford, and then, the Big 12 champion has 1 loss. I mean, it's got to be something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't think that's the way it's going to play out, and I don't think Memphis is one of the 4 best teams
right
in the country. But it does present an interesting scenario for the committee because they're clearly a good team, and they've played a fairly representative schedule, and they have a very impressive win over potentially the SEC champion. Again, we'll see. But I mean, if that's the way it's played out, it presents a great. It's exactly the kind of nightmare that people thought could happen the way the system is set up. And so, if you are one to root for chaos, then that would be a fun thing to root for.
Well, Condoleezza Rice, she'll get it all figured out. Hey, but Dan, we really appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Great stuff in there. Hey, you just tell it how it is and what you think. Some people agree, some don't, but that's why I call it America. Dan, we appreciate you being on. Thanks very much.
Sure.